Way.
All right, good morning, Mr. Atama Katama. I'm Jiten Yumnam. I come from Manipur, which is the northeast part of India. I'm here in Belgrade attending two meetings. One is the Civil Society Summit, which is organized by the Civil Society Partnership for Development Effectiveness CPD, along with the Civicus and Balkan Civil Society Network, and then, of course, a couple of other organizations that happened on the 8th of April. And after that, we also attend the International Civil Society Week, which is mostly organized by the Civicus. In the first day on the Civil Society Summit, there were a series of sharings looking into the situation of the civil society, especially focusing on the shrinking civil society space. And there are different reflections of the situation all around the world, but also looking and reflecting on why there are shrinking civil society space, looking into the different dimension of the political and economic aspect. So we heard sharings from Asia, we also heard sharings from North Africa, we also hear sharings from Latin America, we also hear sharings from different other parts. So what we come across during the first Civil Society Summit is how there's a commonality of the pattern as to how there are shrinking civil society space, how there are increased introduction of policies and regulatory mechanisms to control and restrict the functioning of the civil societies, to take away the rights, to minimize the role of the civil society. And we also realize how the pursuit of democratic principle is accompanied with a lot of the undemocratic practice. So that is one of our learning. And then, of course, during the plenary session and also during the breakout sessions, we are also able to bring in our own experience of how civil societies are subjected to more restrictions and also the direct targeting of attacks through laws and also through the criminal laws, for example, through the emergency law, and also the laws with is focused on advancing the role of the private sector and corporate expansion in communities, land, and territories. And specifically for indigenous communities, which I represent, and also share, we were able to share on what is happening in our own part of the world. In Manipur, in northeast part of India, for example, there is an increased corporate expansionism, which is associated with militarism. For example, there are increased pursuit of hydropower projects, the oil exploration, and also the infrastructure push, all in an environment where there are no legal recognition of indigenous people's rights, and also the increased criminalization of indigenous peoples for raising their voice and concern on the undemocratic development practices. And also we share about how the militarization process accompanied with the emergency law will lead to the fundamental rights violation, but also increased targeting of the civil societies, human rights organizations, indigenous people's organizations. So we were able to share those examples, and then, of course, during the International Civil Society Week, we were also able to raise concerns with the way how the new, political and economic domination approach in terms of promoting democratization process or developmental paradigm, how it affects the rights and role of the civil societies, in promoting a more in promoting development effectiveness principles or in promoting a more democratic development processes. So we also learned during the International Civil Society Week as to how, like for example, in the Balkans, how the civil society network in the Balkans were able to share the similar patterns of shrinking civil society role, as to how the governments in the region are also resorting to more undemocratic practices of subduing the rights of the civil society. And here in the Balkans, one of the learning in the Balkan is because the region, this is a post-conflict, a lot of the countries in the region are post-conflict situation, and then trying to focus on democratic rules and governance, and also many of the countries are actually trying to become members of the European Union, which supposedly is considered as a democratic, and a rights-based region. But then the situation is far from democratic. The situation is far from resorting to the effective development practices. So there is a lot of sharing of experiences. There is a lot of exchange. And during the International Civil Society Summit, we were also able to raise concerns around peace building, for example, which is one of the sessions that we attend. How the peace building process can also be a pattern of causing more conflict, inciting more exclusion, and how peace building process can also be a tussle of power, which can also cause a multi-layered conflict situation. Like in our case, the conflict caused by the political subjugation of indigenous people's movement for self-determination, and how the pursuance of the aggressive corporate expansion can also lead to multi-layered conflict among the indigenous community, within the indigenous communities, and also with the state. So we were able to share concerns around the peace-building effort, and based on the different contexts that we experienced. And of course, we were also and the most important aspect of the Civil Society Summit, and also the Civil Society Week, is we were able to build up a stronger networking with many of the civil societies from all around the world. People who share similar situations, and people who have good experience of how they are able to confront those kind of situations, how they're trying to overcome those kind of situations. So there are sharings as to how people build more solidarity and strength among the different organizations, both within locally and also at the regional level and global level, and then how some groups are able to withstand the regulatory mechanisms. They try to restrict, so they are able to change, not just withstand, but also able to push back those regulatory mechanisms, which intends to restrict more civil society space. And of course, we are also able to, link with many of the international organizations who are here. They try to support human rights organizations or the civil society space. So for example, we were able to be part of this the Human Rights Defender Support Initiative, which is a conglomeration of, it's called the Lifeline Support, which is with the Frontline Defender, and then there are a couple of other organizations that comes together. So we were able to talk about digital security, how do we ensure the protection of the human rights organization, and how do we advance our solidarity and support, how can we be more careful, how can we be more strategic in terms of our engagement with the multi-stakeholder, with the government, with the other set of. So that is one experience that we gain. And then, of course, we also, at least from our side, we are able to meet the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, Mr. Michael Frost here. And so we able to share on some of the concerns around our human rights defender and the shrinking civil society space in our part. And we are able to build up that space for further interaction and for the sharing of information and for the sharing of building up solidarity process. And of course, we were also able to be part of the Freedom Runners. This is an initiative of the especially the youths who try to fight for justice for the human rights defenders, and also the ones who are subjected to targeted by the state, by the governments in different parts of the world. So this is more like extending solidarity to the human rights defenders who are at risk, who are under threat, but also to build the momentum for rights and justice in the specific areas that we all strive in. Despite all the positive aspects, despite all the advancement in terms of building more solidarity and allies and groups during the Civil Society Meet and the International Civil Society Summit and Week, one of the challenges I feel that we should be talking more about the causative aspect of that leads to the shrinking civil society space. Now we need to talk. I feel we need to focus a little bit more on what are the political aspect, political reasons, what are the economic reasons that led to the shrinking civil society space. And I think that aspect is really important because when you talk about shrinking civil society space, because civil society is shrinking, we need to talk about the causative factor, the root cause as to why there are shrinking civil society space. Because civil society, the shrinking of space doesn't come just as a mechanical process, because there are inherent factors, political factor, the economic factor, the social reasons. There are other dimensions as to why there are shrinking space. I think we also need to talk more about it, and something that we need to address it, because there are fundamental structural issues, that we really need to talk about transformation, because there is, because as you know, there is the world continues to function, the current system continues to function in a way where the dominant countries, countries with economic and political dominancy of culture, they continue to pursue their politics of domination through economy, through policies, and through influence at the multilateral international organizations. And I think this is something that we really need to tackle with, unless and until if we don't tackle the neoliberal system, for example, unless and until we tackle the continued pursuance of the dominant economic model, like by the European Union or by the United States or by many other countries with strong economic interests, like Japan, for example, China, for example, India, for example. I think we really need to talk about how many of these countries are actually pursuing their politics of dominion through economy and through politics. And I think we really need to focus on that as well, and how those politics lead to subsuming and restriction of indigenous people's rights. So this is one area that I feel we really need to focus, and I feel we can have more dialogue and more interaction on this aspect. But otherwise, the Civil Society Summit and the Civil Society Week is really a good space for all of us to learn, share, and also build stronger alliance and solidarity for greater justice, rights, and democracy all over the world. Thank you very much.
I think lastly, what are your take from IPMSDL having attended the regional forum in Bangkok, and that's for the Sustainable Development Goals, and now in Belgrade? Were there any talks about the Sustainable Development Goal and the roles of civil society and mass movements at the European region conversation?
Yeah, I think that is one of the area which I feel we need to talk more, no? Because I feel especially the civil studies body summit and also the civil society week really need to focus a little bit more on this aspect, no? Because a lot of the shrinking role of the civil society, the shrinking space of the civil society is actually because of the pursuance of layers of policy and regulatory environment, which is very much related to the efforts to implement and realize the sustainable development goals. No, so if you look at the goals on Goal 7, Goal 9, Goal 7 is on energy, Goal 9 is in resilient infrastructure, Goal 15 on climate change, because we find a lot of the initiatives are actually impacting on the lives and also the environment and culture and tradition of indigenous communities, and also many of the marginalized and rural communities, no? Not just in Asia or in Africa, but even in the European Union. And I think this is one area that we really need to focus more, because the pursuance of this, of the kind of initiative at the policy level and also at the project level are something that actually influence the rights and role of the civil society, because this is one area where there is a very strong pursuance of dominant economic culture and economic model of development, no? Where countries like Europe, countries like US, countries like Japan with very strong economic power, they continue to push for policies of neoliberal policies and policies that can actually benefit the corporate bodies, no? And I think this is the process that actually lead to the increased assault on the land and territory of many of the indigenous communities, no? And I think this is something that we really need to be talked here as well, because this is something that affects not just the lives of many of the marginalized communities out here, but also many of the marginalized communities in Asia and Africa and Latin America, you know. And I think that conversation and also the positive aspect of the impact on the range of marginalized and communities, no. And I think this is something that we really need to talk here, because otherwise, like, it will leave people behind, no. And still a lot of people are still left behind. And and this is something that really need to be conscious by a range of the civil societies all around, no, not just the one that believes in, who confronts or who are facing the brunt of those policies, no, dominant economic model, but even the civil societies from all around the world who believes in rights and justice. They really need to talk about this. Yeah.
Okay. Lastly,
because in interacting
what?
We have rent in this dining room, so if you can just finish now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that fine?
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.